house was 155 years old. It was gone in an hour and a half. This is just one of many hundreds of buildings that will have to be demolished over the next weeks and months. In the city centre, 1 in 3 buildings assessed so far has been found to be structurally unsound. The precariousness of so many buildings makes the work of the rescue and body recovery teams that much harder, as aftershocks continue to bring masonry down. In the suburbs, different problems. One, silt. When the quake hit, in a process called liquefaction, muddy water bubbled up through the ground. This is what it's left behind. Many suburbs still have no power nor water, so volunteers 30 kilometres from Christchurch have started a production line of hot food. A local helicopter company then flies in to pick it up.
As of yesterday, we flew in 12,000 kgs of hot food, hot meals into some of the poorest and hardest hit suburbs of Christchurch.
This is where the meals end up. When the residents of Burwood hear the rotor blades, they flock.
We had grilled cheese sandwiches on the barbecue the first night, so this is much better.
Because you can't store food with no refrigeration, that's this is a good proper meal.
Streets can be cleaned, power will return, but buildings and people in Christchurch are gone forever. The city will never be what it was before. Andrew Thomas, AlJazeera, Christchurch.
Now, exit polls in Ireland's elections predict a new government will be led by the opposition party Fine Gael. Counting has begun and the main ruling party, Fianna Fáil, could be heading for its worst ever defeat. After 14 years in power, many voters blame that party for its mishandling of the economic crisis. It led the government through Ireland's boom years, which ended with a joint EU-IMF bailout. If elected, Fine Gael has said it will try to renegotiate the terms of Ireland's debts. Now, South Sudan is set to become the world's newest nation on July the 9th. With it comes the daunting task of state building. Much of the south was destroyed during the country's decades-long civil war. And now officials say their first priority is job creation. Harry Matassa has this story from Juba.
18-year-old Gloria is gaining some much-needed skills. According to the United Nations, around 85% of adults in southern Sudan can't read or write. That's why this auto mechanics class could give Gloria the head start she's looking for.
Others are getting afraid because there are no jobs. If you have certificate, you will not get a job here in southern Sudan. But if you have the knowledge of doing such things, it will help you.
Many schools were destroyed during the Civil War. Juba Technical College is being rebuilt by Plan International, one of many non-governmental organizations working in the region. Southern Sudan will gain independence on the 9th of July. Job creation is one of many challenges facing this new nation. There are no unemployment figures, but officials say the number is far too high. Victoria is looking for anyone who can employ her as a social worker, but there are no vacancies.
You can see many people there looking for jobs and they are not getting anything to do. Yeah. Then some of them maybe they may think to go and do some other things like business, but it's very hard to start.
Officials hope to one day have a dynamic economy that will create jobs, but right now the resources simply aren't there.
The challenges are actually those connected with funds. So to counter this, people will have to sit down and try to plan better how to manage these finances.
But it's not just about creating jobs for those already in southern Sudan. Officials say close to 400,000 Southerners still living up in the north plan to head back to the region, and some fear this will put more pressure on already stretched resources. Aid agencies say hundreds of thousands of people have returned in the last few months. Sustainable development is crucial for a people hoping independence will improve their lives by creating a steady stream of work. Harry Matassa, AlJazeera, Juba, Southern Sudan.
It's 1:30. Let's remind you of the main stories on Al Jazeera. Libya's ex-interior minister has told Al Jazeera Tripoli is the only major city in Muammar Gaddafi's hands. The Libyan leader made another defiant address, vowing he won't step down on Friday. Nazanin Mashiri is at the Tunisian border town of Ras Ajdi, where she says Gaddafi still controls key areas of the west.
Speaking to people who are crossing this border, we are painting a picture of what is happening in western Libya. What we are hearing is that many of the towns on the way from Tripoli to here are in the hands of the local population. Police and army are changing sides, but the strategic checkpoints and the main roads are still very much under the control of pro-Gaddafi forces.
Meanwhile, international pressure is building on Libya. The US has imposed sanctions on the government, and the UN Security Council is meeting again on Saturday to firm up a draft resolution calling for sanctions. Yemen's president is facing growing pressure to resign, with key tribal leaders announcing their support for the anti-government movement. They include members of the Hashid tribe, which is considered the country's most powerful. Its members hold several key government positions. In Egypt, the Judicial Committee tasked with changing the constitution has proposed cutting the presidential term to 4 years and imposing a 2-year term limit. Details of other suggested amendments are expected to be released on Saturday. The committee's proposals will eventually be put to a national referendum. Meanwhile, Egypt's ruling military council has apologized after military police beat protesters during overnight demonstrations in Cairo. The council said the violence was the result of unintentional confrontations between the military police and the youth of the revolution. It's also ordered the immediate release of all those arrested on Friday night. Iraq's largest oil refinery has come under attack from a team of gunmen, killing at least 2 workers. The plant is part of the Beji complex, around 250 kilometers north of Baghdad. A team of gunmen infiltrated the refinery in the middle of the night, then fled before detonating the devices. A Pakistani court has jailed an American national for overstaying his visa. The arrest of Aaron DeHaven in Peshawar comes amid tension between the US and Pakistan over the detention of a CIA contractor, Raymond Davis. Davis could face trial over the killing of 2 Pakistanis in what he says was an act of self-defense. Those are the headlines. I will be back at the top of the hour. Coming up next on Al Jazeera Worldview, an interview.
Hello, I'm Kamal Santamaria and welcome to a special collaborative interview here on Al Jazeera between us and you. We're here in Muscat, the Omani capital, to speak to the UK's Prime Minister David Cameron. The only difference this time, though, is that you've submitted the questions. It's part of the YouTube Worldview program, where one world leader is interviewed every month, and the questions are submitted through YouTube by you. A series of international and domestic policy questions, videos and texts, which we then put to David Cameron on your behalf. Prime Minister, thank you so much for your time. The format of our interview is we've got all the questions in from viewers around the world. They've sent in text questions, they've sent in video questions, and we've split it up into some foreign policy, some domestic policies. We hope to cover a nice broad range of things. First question, it's a video question, and it's, I think, very important at this moment. It's an international one. It's about the situation of the uprisings that we've seen in the Middle East. So let's have a look.
David, my question is this. Over the last couple of weeks, we've seen civilians being killed and beaten in the streets in several Middle Eastern countries using weapons that were sold to them by British companies. And my question is, how do you justify going this week on a tour of North African and Middle Eastern countries with several representatives from weapons companies with the aim of selling those governments yet more weapons, which we know will probably be used against their civilian population?
So he's essentially asking, you're sending mixed messages about Britain's role in the Middle East?
Not at all. First of all, what I've been saying on this trip this week is the importance of supporting the aspirations of people in North African and Arab countries who want greater democracy, greater freedom, greater rights. That is why I started my trip in Cairo, in Egypt, meeting with the government, also meeting with the protesters and saying that I supported their aspirations and having discussions with that government to try and get them to focus on a proper transition to a real civilian government and genuine democracy in Egypt. On the issue of trade and on defence, we have some of the toughest controls anywhere in the world for selling defence equipment to other countries. I don't think that trade is wrong in every circumstances. After all, how can we expect a small country to manufacture and make all the things it needs to defend itself? One of the countries I went to and one of the countries where we have sold defence equipment in the past and probably will in the future is Kuwait, a country that actually does have a level of democracy, and also a country that was invaded by its neighbour Saddam Hussein. So I don't accept this argument that it's wrong in all circumstances to support the sale of defence equipment. But as I say, Britain, unlike many other countries, has extremely tough controls. And as for whether there is evidence about this equipment has been used, I haven't seen that evidence. So I disagree, I think, with most parts of that question.
Okay, fair enough, fair enough. We'll move on. The next question is a text question. It's on a similar line. They're going back and using Yugoslavia as an example to compare to Libya. In 1999, NATO bombed Yugoslavia because Yugoslav security forces were responsible for crimes against humanity and massive human rights abuse against the cost of our civilian population. Doesn't the UK, as a founder of NATO, find Libya's authorities are doing the same thing?
Well, let me be clear. I think what Libya's authorities are doing is completely unacceptable. This violence, this meting out of vicious, brutal repression, including using aeroplanes, including troops on the streets, including live ammunition, is completely unacceptable, and it must stop. And I completely back what Barack Obama said last night about this. And these actions, yes, they must have consequences. Consequences in the UN Security Council, consequences for those responsible for them. And we should, as Barack Obama said, look at the full range of options in terms of doing that. And people in Libya need to think extremely carefully about what they are doing, because those actions, yes, they should have consequences.
So in relation to that question, you wouldn't draw any parallels between intervention in Yugoslavia years ago and intervention in Libya?
I would condemn human rights abuses and the repression against by governments of their people wherever they happen, Libya included, and all our minds at the moment are focused on that country, and quite rightly so. And what we've seen on our television screens, what is happening on the streets of Tripoli and elsewhere, is completely unacceptable, and it must stop. And as I'm absolutely clear, and if it does not stop, there will be consequences.
Okay then, one more international question before we move to domestic issues.
I want to ask Mr. David, my question will be about England strategy. Why you, democracy, do not respect the winning of Islamic parties in Arabic countries' elections?
Right, the audio wasn't brilliant on that one, but he was essentially saying, why are you not engaging more with Islamic parties who do win elections in this part of the world? I guess from Gaza he's referring to the likes of Hamas. He might even allude to the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt.
I think the point I'd make in Egypt is that I had the opportunity to go and meet people who had protested in Tahrir Square, people who wanted a genuine democracy in Egypt. And one of the points they made to me is that all too often our government or the international community has just gone straight to the Muslim Brotherhood and has not talked to the other people of opposition parties.